Hello everyone, good morning. I welcome all of you to this webinar on coronavirus, myths and facts to help you fight COVID-19 pandemic effectively and confidently. This webinar is brought to you by Press Information Bureau under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India, in collaboration with Government College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Khandala, Marsala, Goa. I'm Kush Nahar, and today we are going to bust some important myths related to coronavirus. It is perhaps quite often that scientists and laymen find themselves wondering how this virus is transmitted. All of us are anxious about finding the ways to tackle it. What are the effective tools in fighting this virus? Do climate conditions have any effect on the spread of the virus? Or do we have any new medicine or vaccine that can fight coronavirus? If these are some of the questions that make you feel anxious, we are here today to debunk some of the silly myths related to these questions and bring you updated facts with our panel of experts, Dr. Rahul Nandakumar Kulkarni, Dr. Chaitanya Balakrishnan, and Dr. Nitin Yashwant. In a brief introduction to our panel of experts, Dr. Rahul is a general physician and has an experience of 7 years in this field. Some areas of his work include critical care, infectious diseases, dermatology, rheumatology, and preventive cardiology. Another expert, Dr. Chaitanya, is a consultant in Department of Medicine and Hematology. He's coordinating on issues of COVID-19 at St. John's Medical College Hospital, Bengaluru. Dr. Nitin is a senior resident in medical oncology and cancer care at Manipal Hospital. He's also the co-founder and editor-in-charge at Alter Doctors, a platform for doctors to share their experiences and views. Besides the panel of experts, Professor Purnakala Samant, Principal of College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Khandala, Marsala, Goa, is also participating and will give keynote address to the webinar. I welcome all of you to this webinar. Before we begin today's webinar, I invite Shri Vinod Kumar, Deputy Director, Press Information Bureau, Goa, to give his welcome address.
Thank you, Kush. Welcome all of you for this webinar on COVID myth versus realities. The Black Death is a 19th century term for the plague epidemic that ravaged Europe in the 14th century, killing an estimated 30 million people in Europe and many more worldwide as it reached pandemic proportions. The cause of the Black Death was primarily attributed to supernatural witchcraft, sorcery, wrath of God, work of devil, alignment of planets, and no effective cure were available at that time. These cures which were available, most of them were ineffective and some of them were fatal based on religious beliefs, folklore, herbalism, and superstition. Since Black Death, we have come a long way and our healthcare and scientific acumen has risen exponentially. Even then, the fakes, the fables, and the myths circulate among us, just like the COVID-19 virus. Ever since the COVID-19 outbreak, India has been waging a two-front war, one against the pandemic and another against the infodemic. The rapid global spread of the COVID-19 has been accompanied by what the World Health Organization has described as massive infodemic, huge demand for information on the disease, its toll on healthcare system and lives, and the many unanswered questions about the virus that was discovered barely and 1.5 years ago have created perfect breeding ground for myths, fake news, and conspiracy theories. This poses a serious threat to people's dependence on sources of information during this risk and crisis. Therefore, it has become important to flatten the curve of the infodemic as to flatten the curve of the COVID-19 pandemic. Press Information Bureau, Government of India, has launched a fact-check portal last year to meet this end. Eating sea lettuce or injecting disinfectant won't prevent you from getting COVID-19. Not holding your breath for 10 seconds is not a test for SARS-CoV-2 virus. Our communication strategy that supports the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in India seeks to disseminate timely, accurate, and transparent information about the vaccines and to alleviate apprehensions about the vaccine, its fears, and its ensure acceptance and encourage its uptake. Our communication strategy is based on 5 pillars: on advocacy, on capacity building, on crisis communication, social mobilization, and community engagement. Along with that, we have our media engagement and social media. Rest assured that Government of India is engaged with all its machinery in its full might to fight this pandemic as well as this infodemic. I'm not extending this speech. We have a panel of eminent speakers over here who can bust some of the prominent myths which has been circulating in WhatsApp universities. Let's science it out. Over to you, Kush.
Thank you, Shri Vinod Kumar. That was very informative take on historical facts and current strategy. Now, I call upon Professor Purnakala Samant, Principal of College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Khandala, Marcella, Goa, to render her keynote address. Welcome, ma'am.
Yes. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome one and all to this webinar on the COVID-19 myths versus realities.
I think there is some problem with the video there. It's not very audible. I think we'll have Professor Purnakala Samant back with us in just a bit. So just to inform the audience that today's session is on busting myths and facts, basically myths, and bringing out the facts to you. And just in a short while, we'll have Professor Purnakala Samant with us, hopefully, to deliver the keynote address. The whole idea about busting myths on coronavirus is that there is a lot of information that is being spread out there, which misguides people in tackling this virus. So that doesn't help. It doesn't help at any level. So we're not really able to get back Professor Purnakala Samant with us right now. So I think we can go ahead and start the technical session. Or wait, we have Professor Purnakala Samant. Thank you, ma'am. Please join us and deliver your keynote address. Thank you.
Hello.
You're audible, ma'am. You're audible. You can continue, please.
It gives me a great pleasure to welcome one and all to this webinar on COVID-19 myths versus realities, organized by Press Information and Broadcasting, Government of India in collaboration with Government College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Marcella, Goa. I congratulate PIB, Government of India, for taking such newer initiatives for the benefit of young learners and to build society at a large for on the basis of realities of COVID-19. The speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Rahul Kulkarni from Sahyadri Hospital, Pune, who is here to set the record straight for the existing myths versus realities of COVID-19. We are all been exposed to the huge amount of COVID-19 information on the daily basis, and not all of it is reliable. There are several ways one can flatter the infodemic curve. Individuals in society can closely stop the spread of misinformation by simply not sending a rumor to the group chat, double checking the facts, getting information from trusted source like PIB, or by simply asking, how do you know that to be true? With current wave in India, misconception and rumor, and more precisely myths, are spreading faster than the viral infection itself. At this crucial time, it is very important not to be panicked, and information should be consumed from authorized sources, only WHO, healthcare providers, etc. That is the only way myths can be busted. A recent scientific publication on the very same title as today's webinar, Rahman et al. 2021, has clearly provided scientific evidences that people are shockingly unaware of COVID-19, relying more on myths, hearsay, and false belief rather than correct medical information. Myths have been widely prevalent about various diseases since time immemorial. They are they have a cultural influence and can have a very degree of impact over the society. Several infections like leprosy, tuberculosis have also led then fair share of myths only to be busted by scientific research.
Oh, it seems like Professor Purnakala Saman's video froze there. So, yeah, those are very wise words, and I think she has her hand on the pulse of information and misinformation, because she being the principal of our college. So let's begin with busting myths related to coronavirus with our panel of experts. And we hope that our viewers find themselves more aware and confident in prevention of spread of coronavirus at the end of the session. So I begin the session with asking a question to Dr. Kulkarni about the myth. If the public water supply is contaminated with COVID-19, the entire community will be infected. So you may please shed some light on this, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing good and good health. So, as far as the myths about coronavirus and its infection and its treatment and every possible thing we can think about myths and coronavirus, there are a lot of things which we can't really answer sometimes, and sometimes we can answer scientifically also. So it's very difficult to address each and every myth, and it can be even personal also. Somebody can individually think about something innovative ideas and something like that. Somebody might have individual experiences with some kind of own set of treatment or own set of investigations or own set of experiences basically. So to start with COVID and its myths, as you asked me right now, the first question is regarding water. Basically, does coronavirus travel through water or not? If we can we get contaminated? Can we if we have a water, maybe drinking or swimming pool or whatever contact with the water, tap water even sometimes, can we get COVID because of water supply or swimming pools? So basically, as whatever research has been done till now, there has been no as such significant research evidence that it shows that COVID or coronavirus can travel through water. So it's not a waterborne or water traveling disease as such. But still, sometimes, like if you are in a swimming pool or somewhere water resources, you are swimming, or then you should avoid going near the group of people or going to mainly crowded areas on swimming pool areas. That's where you can get infected if you are within 1 meter distance of a COVID patient and who has coughing or sneezing, something like that. And so everywhere, the only thing which is important is maintaining a social distance. So social distance of around 1 meter while you are in a swimming pool or a water area, reservoir area, that should be sufficient enough to prevent yourself from COVID infection basically. And as such, there is no evidence basically. If you are drinking water from anywhere, that is quite safe. In my opinion, till now, no evidence has been suggested that you can get a COVID from drinking water from any infected areas or something like that.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for busting that myth. Now we'll move on to Dr. Nitin. May I ask you, Dr. Nitin, about taking hot water bath or drinking hot water? Can that prevent or stop coronavirus infection?
So I think, first of all, thanks to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and the Press Information Bureau for having this wonderful thing. As Vinod Kumar Shri already said, it is not only about battling the pandemic, but how successfully we can crush the infodemic of spreading false information that will guarantee success in fighting this disease in our country. So coming to your question, this actually was addressed in a scientific study which was done, if I'm not mistaken, in UK, where they looked at if hot water can cure common cold or something like that. And what they found was that it can provide relief in symptoms. So it can only provide relief in symptoms due to various mechanisms, and sometimes it can just be a mental comfort or placebo that it is providing relief in symptoms. But no, drinking hot water does not cure coronavirus, nor does it kill the coronavirus in the body. I will tell you a very simple reason why. Now, in a laboratory setting, to kill the coronavirus, you need temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius to 75 degrees Celsius. Now, the human body temperature is usually between almost around 37 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine what we are talking about. As sometimes what will happen is these cells, these viruses inside the cells in the body, and the human body maintains its core temperature around 37 degrees Celsius. So one of the common misconceptions is if you have a hot water bath, the temperature will go up and you will be able to kill the virus. That again is false, because like I said, the core temperature is maintained. In fact, it can be harmful, because we have heard reports where people have taken hot water bath to such an extent that they have developed burns on the skin. And especially one advice I would like to give, especially in the summer season, is that don't try to do anything by exertion, believing you will increase your body temperature, because if the body temperature actually reaches even as 40 degrees Celsius, it can become dangerous, leading to heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So to again reaffirm, drinking hot water or having hot water bath does not kill the coronavirus.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nitin, for that elaborate explanation. Hopefully, this will guide our audience very well in tackling coronavirus. All right. I'll come to Dr. Chaitanya. Dr. Chaitanya, may I ask you about the oxygen concentrators? There is a lot of misinformation related to oxygen concentrators. Can you please shed some light on the issue for our listeners?
Absolutely. Again, good morning to everyone who's logged in. And once again, thank you to the PIB and the ministry for this initiative. As to echo what Nitin said, I think this is something that's as potentially dangerous as the pandemic is the infodemic, and especially false information, because we get a lot of it as consultants on WhatsApp and various other social media. To answer your question about the oxygen concentrator, it's a very, very good question now because of two reasons. One is a lot of people, unfortunately, due to the lack of beds, both not only just in Bangalore, but all over India, are facing this issue with patients who require oxygen but not getting hospital beds or oxygen. And the second is we have a large population of patients who already have pre-existing lung disorders who may be on an oxygen concentrator at home. So these are two key populations to look at. A lot of people believe that having an oxygen concentrator at home can tide over the crisis till you get admitted in the hospital. I believe that. I agree with that. That if you have a patient whose oxygen saturation is less than 94, which classifies as a moderate COVID pneumonia, till you get a hospital bed, till you get in admission, giving supplemental oxygen is beneficial. And there was a study which was published in NCBI which proved the same. But the problem with this is that one is oxygen concentrators, first of all, are difficult to get nowadays. Secondly, people tend to put maximum concentration on the oxygen concentrators and use it themselves without accurate guidance from either a chest physician or an internal medicine specialist, and doing that can potentially be harmful. Why that is especially in people who have certain respiratory diseases which are long term, their normal oxygen saturation may be between 88 to 92, and we do not want to target supra that. But unfortunately, given the craze behind getting your oxygen saturation to 99, taking a photo of that on the pulse ox and sharing it in your family group becomes extremely detrimental to patients. As early as last night, I had a patient with a similar problem. An oxygen concentrator didn't require 99% oxygen, was given the same, unfortunately came unresponsive to our casualty. So these are important things to note. So if you have an oxygen concentrator available till you get a bed, yes, it is useful to give, but definitely never to be done without the guidance of either a chest physician or an internal medicine specialist who will guide you. It also depends on the patient's pre-existing lung condition.
There is another one point I would like
please,
to...
Dr. Kulkarni.
As Dr. Chaitanya says rightfully that O2 concentrator is useful while the patient is being admitted to the hospital. But in another scenario, I have seen a lot of patients who struggle to maintain their oxygen levels despite of being hospitalized in ICUs and wards for almost 40 days, 45 days. Even these patients also, sometimes we advise them to keep a O2 concentrator at home so that if they at all need like 1 liter or 2 liter of oxygen, basic level of oxygen to maintain like around 92% or 94%. Even in that scenario also, we have found that O2 concentrators are useful. But then again, that comes down to the basically a proper guidance that is necessary. And that is okay. While we are discharging the patient, we inform them and we educate them exactly how to use it and how to properly monitor the saturation levels of a patient and when to use it, basically. So that is another part where O2 concentrator comes handy into the application.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for chipping in there. It's very important to know these things because then you are able to make a judicious decision. Thank you for busting that myth about oxygen concentrators. So we'll turn our attention to some medicine-related myths, and I'd like to start with Dr. Chaitanya there. Dr. Chaitanya, vaccines against pneumonia, do they protect against COVID-19 virus? Dr. Chaitanya, your mic is probably not muted.
Sorry.
Right,
So
please.
this is another huge myth, and I think Dr. Rahul and Dr. Nitin will agree with me. When the first wave of COVID hit last year, the number of requests I got for the pneumonia vaccine to be administered was, people would come to my, this was before COVID vaccine came out, and they would come to my OPD and saying, sir, can I get the pneumonia vaccine? And I would always assume it was COVID. And I said, no, it's not come out yet. No, sir, we heard there's a vaccine on the market which we want. And a lot of patients actually put pressure on us to give it to them. And in fact, there was a small study which was done in Netherlands, which said that they would, if there was some potential cross protectivity between giving the influenza vaccine and COVID, which has unfortunately been busted, thankfully, or fortunately rather. So if you give, we have vaccines specific for specific organisms causing infection. Influenza, which is a virus, pneumococcal, which is a pneumonia. So there are various types of vaccines which are available. Unfortunately, giving them does not protect you against COVID vaccine. There is a separate vaccine for COVID, which is available. Giving you vaccines against the other pneumonias does not protect against COVID. And this is something that's created a lot of strain because a lot of elderly senior citizens above 60 are due for annual non-COVID pneumonia vaccines. And because of people trying to get vaccinated with them to prevent COVID, a lot of shortage has unfortunately hit Bangalore. And I urge everybody to believe that there is a vaccine specific for COVID. Other vaccines do not protect you against them.
I just want to add there for the general public in a very simple simile that I would like to give. If you have a petrol powered car, you cannot put diesel in the car and make it run. So it has to be a specific vaccine for that specific agent. Now the pneumonia vaccines are caused by different bacterial organisms, and you also have the influenza virus vaccine. Now we cannot expect them to provide immunity against a novel virus, which is the COVID virus, which has emerged in 2019. And thanks to the brilliant work done by Indian scientists and scientists across the world, we have been able to get vaccines which target this virus specifically or the antigen of this virus. A very simple example, if someone gets bitten by a dog, they have to take the rabies vaccine. You cannot give a vaccine which is meant for something else like a hepatitis B virus vaccine or something else. So each vaccine is designed for that specific virus, and I urge everyone to please take the COVID-19 vaccine because those are the vaccines which will prevent COVID-19. Those who are elderly and are due for the pneumonia vaccine can take it in parallel according to the guidelines.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya and Dr. Nitin. That was very informative to bust the myth about pneumonia vaccine. All right, I'll turn my attention to another very important issue, another very important myth, which is doing rounds about remdesivir is a must in fighting COVID-19. May I please ask Dr. Kulkarni to bust this myth?
So basically, remdesivir, it is an antiviral agent. It's not an antibiotic or it is not an antibacterial agent, first of all. And COVID is a virus. So when you talk about remdesivir, everybody is rushing for their relatives to get a remdesivir injection nowadays. That's a very common scenario. Initially, it was in Pune and Mumbai here, and later on, it has turned out to be the same thing all over India right now. So I would like to tell everybody, even the government of India has issued some basic guidelines for use of remdesivir for doctors also and for other people also, that it can't be given at home, first of all. That's very important thing. And coming to busting the myth, remdesivir is not the only treatment available for COVID. Yes, it is a treatment. It is one of the treatment. Remdesivir was started using in COVID, as it was basically seen in few trials initially last year, that it has shown some potency to stop the replication of the virus. It's not to stop the disease. It just stops the replication or slows down the replication of the virus. So it is an antiviral. Whenever virus comes into a host, like a human host, basically, it starts replicating once it enters the cell of the human cells. And while it starts replicating, remdesivir might be helpful to slow down the replication of the viral or to reduce the viral load. But again, while using remdesivir, it is very important to think that it's not a life-saving medication. That's what has been told by the government of India. And even in some trials, WHO also had issued a warning that don't use remdesivir last year. But despite of that, my personal experience, and I hope everybody else also feels same thing, that if used wisely in early cases, like within 7 days of a viral COVID infection, and mainly if the patient looks toxic clinically, mainly warning signs like high-grade continuous fever, high levels of some investigations like CRP, D-dimer, and ferritins, and the patient is continuously progressively getting toxic while he is admitted, then it is a good choice to go ahead, but only within first 7 days. Afterwards, it hardly is useful, and that's what the scientific data has proven so far. And secondly, I think remdesivir, if you go on using, like every patient, who there are a lot of people who keep on calling us whether you have remdesivir stock or not. My first question to them is basically how many days have passed since the patient has developed the symptoms. Because if the patient is already on ventilator, he has just admitted and he's on ventilator, it's like almost 12 or 13 days of infection, then hardly there is any use of starting remdesivir at this stage of the illness. Whatever treatment he needs, that is totally different aspect of discussion later on. But remdesivir is not the only treatment, but definitely it can be useful, only used under proper guidance, like a proper chest physician or physician's guidance. And it's totally solely a doctor's responsibility to use the remdesivir or not. That's my own personal opinion. That's what the government of India has advised for so far. Even they have advised doctors not to use later on also, and like after 10 days or 12 days, or somebody is on ventilator and there is no possibility of him coming back, or there is poor prognosis overall. There is no role of remdesivir in those scenarios. It's the other supportive medications and nursing care and everything else that matters more in those patients, rather than using remdesivir injection. I think Dr. Chaitanya and Dr. Nitin might have different opinions and might elaborate more on this.
Please.
Yeah, just to echo what Dr. Kulkarni said, yes, remdesivir is one of the members of the armory that we have, limited armory as much as I can say, against COVID. But as he very, very, very rightly said, it is not a life-saving drug that you have to run behind getting it for every patient. I mean, the amount of black market purchase of remdesivir has scared even all of us to see how people are misinformed about it. Just to clarify for everybody listening, there are two phases generally in COVID. We have a first week where you have the virus replicating within the system, and week 2 where the immune system is unfortunately triggered. And as Dr. Kulkarni said, the first 1 week is critical to, if you're going to give remdesivir, it should be within those first 7 days. If it's beyond 7 days or the patient's already on a ventilator in a prolonged case of illness, it is not going to change anything. In fact, the National Institute of Health, UK has also put out, and the US have put out a very, very strict notion that mild COVID, no remdesivir. Severe COVID on the ventilator, no remdesivir. It's only the moderate patients within those first 7 days who are toxic or raised inflammatory markers, as Dr. Kulkarni said, who may benefit. Again, the key word being who will or may benefit. There is no 100% guarantee with remdesivir. There are a lot more drugs, but from personal experience, I've seen if you choose the right patient at the right time with steroids and remdesivir, you can get good outcomes. But that is a clinician's decision based on what he's seeing in front of him and what WhatsApp or Google is telling the family. It's which patient will recover, which patient will not. And it's also the timing of the medicine that's extremely important. and that plays an important role. So we've been giving remdesivir quite a bit in St. John's, but we have also cut down after recent data showed that in severe patients it's not very useful. We choose our patients and who we give it to, and of course now the government has come out with a very strict guideline with respect to that. So a lot of patients and relatives are so, they come to the hospital and they want two things: CT thorax and remdesivir. And if you don't provide both, they look at us saying the whole world is doing it, why aren't you? And this is a very big myth that remdesivir is going to save your life. No, if used well, it's one of the drugs to help you out.
All right, Dr. Chaitanya, thank you so very much for that informed take on remdesivir.
Push.
Please.
Similarly, I think there is another drug. I think we can cover that also in short time. Favipiravir, Fabiflu, the most common name used. I'll just add 2 lines for it. Similarly, we talk about remdesivir. It is also an antiviral. It is an oral form of an antiviral, which is very weak potency, which has got a very weak potency. But again, some guidelines have said, I don't want to go into technicalities, but some guidelines, like even the government of Maharashtra task force also recommends is to use only if you start within first 3 to 4 days of the illness. So first 3 to 4 days of the illness with mild symptoms, you can start with Favipiravir or Fabiflu. But that is the decision of a clinician or an internal medicine expert, because that is a very weak and very weakly potent drug. And again, you have to take a lot of tablets. That's again a concern. The tablet loading is a big thing. I mean, you need to take, if you have a 200 milligram tablet, you need to take 9 tablets and something. So it's very confusing for everybody. So my best advice is, don't go into the details about any kind of antiviral medications. Just stick to your proper clinician, whoever is available nearby to you, you can contact with. That is the best possible solution, because unnecessarily pulling up the injections and putting in your house and tablets, that is not a solution to go ahead. That will unnecessarily create a lot of confusion and chaos amongst other people who might not have it.
Yeah, that's a very positive message, Dr. Kulkarni. And I hope that stops people from hoarding and black marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Life-saving for sometimes.
Some at least.
Sometimes, yeah, not always. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn my attention to another myth related to medicine called dexamethasone. I will ask Dr. Nitin, can you please tell us more about this myth, if dexamethasone is a treatment for all COVID-19 patients?
So one thing we need to understand is that dexamethasone, which is a form of steroid, and it is one of the oldest medicines which is available, but it is a very potent medicine which is used in many patients. We use dexamethasone even in some form of blood cancers also. We use it sometimes to prevent chemotherapy-induced vomiting. It is used by dermatologists. It is used by immunologists. So it is something which has a wide variety of use. So how did it come in the treatment of COVID-19? So we know that the WHO, that is the World Health Organization, was conducting trials across many countries, looking at which medicines can impact. And we are happy to say that dexamethasone was probably the first drug in this COVID era which showed it has some benefit in reducing deaths. And that was one of the biggest news that the medical fraternity received, that dexamethasone could reduce deaths. Now, the question is, in whom it will reduce deaths? So we have scientific evidence to answer this question. Those people who are having severe disease and are on ventilators, the benefit with dexamethasone is the maximum. That is to say, the percentage reduction of death by giving the steroid is maximum in these group of patients. Are there any other group of patients who can benefit from this? Yes, those with moderate disease who are receiving oxygen also derive benefit from steroids. But then the third question is, do mild patients or patients without any symptoms or just having some fever, cough, sore throat benefit from this dexamethasone? Absolutely not. In fact, the trial also showed that it can be a little bit harmful if these patients take it, because the theory or the reasoning behind this is, when you give dexamethasone in the first week, it might actually suppress your immune system and prevent the body from fighting the virus. Therefore, my humble request to the public and everyone watching this is, dexamethasone, yes, is a wonderful drug in COVID-19. It has excellent data that it can prevent death, and reduce the risk of death rather in those with moderate and severe disease, but not in mild disease. Please do not panic. Please do not start stockpiling dexamethasone from pharmacy, because dexamethasone is a very cheap drug. There is lot of production facilities in this country, and there are other forms of steroids available. Hopefully, we will never run out of steroids, because steroids are also being used in many other conditions, like I already said. So dexamethasone to be prescribed only under the supervision of the COVID-19 physician for moderate and severe disease, and that too under specific circumstances, not for mild disease. It may tend to be harmful also if you take it in the first week. We need to understand what are the side effects of dexamethasone. Dexamethasone and steroids can cause sugars to go up. So that's why, especially if you're at home and you're a diabetic who is asymptomatic, please do not start taking dexamethasone without the supervision of a doctor, because then you might lead to other complications where your sugars might go out of control.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nitin. That was very informative. Maybe move on to the next question, which is a lot of, it's been seen that a lot of people do take antibiotics referred by relatives and sometimes by doctors also. May you please shed some light on the effective usage of antibiotic while one is affected with COVID-19, or if it is not to be used at all? Please.
Yeah, so a couple of comments from my side on that. I think when the pandemic first started last year, and we were not too sure the devil that we were dealing with, we would definitely put them on prophylactic antibiotics because we at that point didn't probably completely understand the virus as much as we do now. But I think it's very clear from scientific data that giving antibiotics prophylactically in COVID has no role. And in fact, there are certain studies, especially based in the UK and a couple of studies in Delhi as well, which have said that if you early antibiotic and inappropriate or injudicious use of antibiotics in COVID-19, in fact, rather than not doing anything, may in fact increase the hospital stay and all-cause mortality in such patients. So the tendency to take an over-the-counter azithromycin, the tendency to go to your local pharmacist and say fever, sore throat, give me something to take for it, is completely unadvisable. If you're suspecting that you have symptoms of COVID, get tested, meet a COVID care physician, and take the appropriate treatment. Especially using antibiotics in COVID-19 is completely avoidable. There are some situations, of course, which you do use them when you're suspecting a secondary infection, especially in patients who are hospitalized for a long period of time. Severe COVID on the ventilator may develop a secondary bacterial infection. Again, there, the choice of antibiotic has to be left to the critical care or the COVID care physician. Taking over the counter or Dr. Google prescribed antibiotics is a complete no-no in COVID-19.
Thank you,
There is
Dr.
one
Chetty.
thing, yeah,
Please, Dr.
I would just like to add about it. There are some patients who tend to copy paste the same prescription, give it to their own relatives also. That's quite often we have seen it, and unfortunately that shouldn't be done because what happens, every patient has some set of symptoms, and every doctor, whenever they plan for any kind of treatment, they have something in their own mind. That's why they prescribe those medications. If you start following same sort of prescription for every patient, you might land up in some other side effects, and that can be little more harmful than having any effect on you. So again, that's important, that trust your clinician, follow the treatment whatever he's prescribing, and keep in touch with the clinician. That's very important at every stage of the illness.
I think I just want to highlight one important point for the public which is watching this. Sometimes there is a lot of pressure on doctors also from the patient saying, so and so is being prescribed this medicine, doctor, what are you doing? Why are you not giving me this? And sometimes because of this pressure, the prescriptions which I have seen is like how to make aloo bindi curry or khichdi. That much length the prescription will have so many medicines because of sheer pressure, or sometimes they would have gone to multiple doctors without telling, previous doctor has given me this, you also give me some new medicine. So at a point of time, even for a mild disease, we have seen patients taking 7 to 10 medicines, which is not required and all. Again, my humble appeal to the public and those watching it is, there are well-defined guidelines by various international bodies such as the WHO, and even now recently 1 week back, the Premier Institute, All India Institute of Medical Science, has also released how to manage mild disease at home, what are the medicines to be taken, and all that. So when in doubt, refer to these credible sources from international bodies or national bodies which are based on research. Yes, there are some drugs which may be antibiotic or antiparasitic which are under trial or are being explored, but that doesn't mean everyone takes it blanketly.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin. I think our panel of experts have contributed brilliantly to this question, and hopefully this will guide our audience and viewers. Now we'll turn our attention to women's health and some pregnancy and birth related questions on COVID-19. Rather myths. So one of the myths is that COVID-19 infection can be transmitted from mother to the child, fetus, during the process of birth, delivery, or pregnancy. May you please shed some light on this? Thank you.
As such, till the whatever data is available, the data is too small. You can, it's just been like 1.5 years maximum that has been the COVID's duration till now. The pregnancy itself takes at least minimum 9 months to go through basically. So the data is minimal, but till today, if you if you ask me for an answer in one sentence or one word, I'll say that it is very uncommon. I have not seen a single case of basically pregnant woman giving birth to a baby and the baby is getting an infection. And even if the baby gets the infection, it is very difficult to assess whether the infection is because through the vertical transmission, because of mother to the baby, or whether the baby acquired infection from anywhere else during the procedure of labor, basically. So it's very uncommon till now. Similarly, mother during a pregnant mother during a COVID infection, as we have touched that topic, I'll just like to little bit elaborate on that aspect also. There are a lot of patients, pregnant women coming to me, referred from gynecologists and obstetricians, who have got infected recently in the last like 3 months. The rate of infection in a pregnancy has gone higher side, like every other patient. And a lot of patients are 90 to 95% patients are very stable. No need to panic about it. I have seen, but they have shown that if the patient lands up in a, if the patient is already at risk, like because of some immunocompromised status, because of hypertension, diabetes, or little on higher side of the age group, like 40s, pregnant ladies, 40s or some of that, then they might land up in some sort of complications because of mostly because of COVID pneumonia. And that is the percentage is also very less. We have seen hardly 1 or 2 cases of pregnant ladies with the ICU stay or ARDS pattern, and none of them had such mortality yet. We haven't seen any mortality with a pregnant woman and ARDS or lung infection, basically because of COVID. But as far as the other people are concerned, which is a main group of pregnant women which are infected during this pregnancy, either their first trimester, second trimester, or last trimester, a lot of them have mild symptoms like cough, cold, little bit, lethargy is there, fatigue is there, and few of them had fever also. We treated them only with mild paracetamol and symptomatic treatment, because during pregnancy we are not supposed to give any other medications, because that can create a lot of complications for the fetus or the baby. So it's very important that you should visit the clinician first. Don't sit at home that it will subside on its own. That's the main reason, because they are very scared to go out and see the doctor, because it's already there are a lot of COVID patients. So they are very scared to go out and see the doctor. And because of pregnancy, we are not able to test them properly. We can't go for CT scans or X-rays or any other imaging techniques. That's why it is very difficult to advise anything or video consultation. So better to visit a doctor, get thoroughly checked up yourself, and keep monitoring your vitals. That can be more useful, rather than just having any medications who have been somebody is advising you and taking those medications. It's not advisable. Again, similarly, same thing applies here also.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. In a related question, can COVID-19 infection be transmitted through breast milk to the newborn while breastfeeding? Is there?
As of now, we don't have any evidence that it can be transmitted through breast milk. Now, what the public also needs to realize is that we are dealing with a new disease, which has been there for the last 1.5 to 2 years, and data may change after 2 to 3 years. We do not know about it. But as of now, there is no evidence that COVID-19 transmits through breast milk. So the most important question which then comes is, can a COVID-19 positive mother breastfeed her child? That is one of the most important questions which was asked. And we all know the benefits of breast milk feeding. So right now, guidelines from international bodies and even on the National Health Board of India has said that mothers who are COVID positive can continue breastfeeding their child, but by following certain precautions such as wearing a N95 mask, probably a face shield, following hand hygiene, so that we know that one thing is established: COVID-19 spreads through respiratory droplets. So we try to prevent that as much as possible between the mother and child, and therefore it is important by following these precautions to continue breastfeeding in the normal way between a COVID positive mother who is lactating and her child. We do not have any evidence so far that COVID-19 spreads through breast milk.
There is another thing I would like to just add. In case of newborns and basically children, then I'm just add on to the. It is not advisable to use any mask to the baby until it is like more than 2 years or at least around 5 years or less than 5 years. That can lead to other pediatric respiratory illnesses. Basically, that's the important thing we need to keep in mind. So otherwise, somebody will try to. That can be a little bit. And secondly, another thing, in pregnancy, hello, I'm not able to hear you.
Dr. Kulkarni, your voice is wavering, so please ensure that your voice is constant.
Am I audible now?
Very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So another thing which I would like to mention is during pregnancies, there is another risk while a patient is pregnant. They can deliver the baby early. That's one of the complications which has been seen in some cases. Early delivery is one of the, so you need to be very careful while the patient is COVID positive and in their last trimester, I mean last 3 months of pregnancy, because the baby might be delivered early. So you need to keep regularly in contact with your physician and gynecologist and search for a proper COVID center where the delivery can take place properly.
All right.
That's all.
Yeah. I thank you for that information. I think it would take the worry off a lot of anxious mothers in how to deal with childbirth, pregnancy, and afterwards. Thank you very much. I think we can start the Q&A from our audience. We are running short of time, of course. There are a lot of myths that we want to continue busting, but there are so many of myths and we have little time. So I think we'll continue with some questions that have been put up by the audience. One of the question is from Dr. Sumit Dasgupta. He's talking about a person who was COVID positive 1 month ago and then he recovered. However, in a testing later done, he was still found positive but asymptomatic. So Dr. Sumit Dasgupta is asking how do we deal with it? Because there is the new protocol issued by AIIMS Telemedicine COVID-19 does not mention anything about asymptomatic carriers and there is no guideline there. So he's saying he has a patient who constantly keeps turning positive, but he's asymptomatic.
So this is something we commonly see and we have been experiencing since the last wave, that we have patients who've recovered fully from COVID in terms of their either chest X-ray or CT or their inflammatory markers, gone back home, no symptoms, no fever, but have got retested for some reason and found to be still positive. This can be due to multiple reasons, but the most prominent would be that the test that we do, that the RT-PCR test, will detect if there's any particles, viral particles, especially the nuclear matter of the virus. And this can be not only the live virus, but also some of the dead viral particles as well, the nuclear material from them. And we've had patients who shed the COVID in their RT-PCRs for almost 6 weeks to 8 weeks post recovery from corona. So we will not ever know whether this is the live or the dead virus. One common way to do it, and that's another big thing going on in the infodemic, is the CT value of your RT-PCR. So a lot of people say, what's my CT value? The lower the CT value, the more infective you are. So probably one way to do it is to look at your CT value on an RT-PCR if you're doing it on follow-up, and if it's the CT value is going up, that means the viral load is much less. But again, a lot of patients of ours have come back 6 weeks, 8 weeks later post-recovery, still being COVID positive, and that could be the dead virus nuclear material that you're picking up. I think, as Dr. Kulkarni and Nitin will agree with me, clinically look at the patient, leave it to your COVID physician to take the decision. No need to panic with regards to subsequent positive test. If your symptoms are okay, you've come out of isolation, follow that strictly rather than worry about this.
I think one important point we need to understand is that sometimes we may still find RT-PCR positive. Now the question that comes is, are they infective? Now there are few studies which have been done that the infectivity does not last longer than 10 to 14 days, especially when patients are mild and asymptomatic. So in fact, there's a recent study which has in fact come from the National Basketball Association Occupational Health Program, which was done in USA. And they found that patients who persistently test RT-PCR positive do not necessarily transmit it to anyone else. Like, because of the reasons mentioned by Dr. Chaitanya, there may be some reasons because of which the test is picking up these for a prolonged period of time. Or sometimes we see it in a group of immunocompromised patients that they may not have fully cleared the virus, which is why they may still be testing positive. But do we need to treat them? I think treatment protocol, whatever said and done, is based on, is the person symptomatic and are the symptoms mild, moderate or severe? In medicine, we follow a dictum: treat the patient. Do not go completely only on reports.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin and Dr. Chaitanya. That was very informative. Another question has been posed by Mr. Satendra Singh. He's asking if a fully vaccinated person can be the carrier of the virus. Your voice is not coming, sir. Dr. Nitin, your voice is not coming. Please, yeah.
Ankush, I said I couldn't hear you. If you could just repeat the question.
Yeah. So, Mr. Satendra Singh, he's asking if a fully vaccinated person can be carrier of the virus.
Okay. So now we need to look at the trials which were done. So let us concentrate only on the vaccines available in India currently, which is Covishield and Covaxin. Now we have to understand that the vaccine efficacy was calculated 2 weeks after the second dose. Meaning to say, before this time period, any person can get the corona infection and they may become symptomatic, and at the same time they may be able to transmit. So it's very important, and that is one myth we have to break here. I'm trying to incorporate into this. Oh, I have received 1 dose of COVID-19 vaccine, I've received 1 dose of Covishield or Covaxin, I'm not going to get COVID infection. That is a completely false myth. You have to have 2 doses taken at the time interval, and it is only 2 weeks after that that studies have shown that protective antibodies start developing. So yes, definitely, even if a person has been fully vaccinated, they may still be carriers of the infection. They may still carry the virus, which is why the full emphasis is on that even if you are vaccinated, continue to wear masks, follow hand hygiene, follow social distancing protocol, because you may be able to transmit it to someone else who is not yet vaccinated. However, the one encouraging news which is coming across trials from across the world is post-vaccination, the chance of transmission reduces because the viral load reduces in the body. So vaccination prevents symptomatic COVID-19. That is the endpoint. When we say Covishield, Covaxin is 70 to 80% effective, it means they are effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19, not in getting the infection itself. But now we have encouraging data that even transmission is being reduced, but not to 100%.
I would like to add one thing. There is another myth which we have heard from a lot of people actually in Pune here. A lot of people have gone for vaccination, they got infected. That's their point of thinking. That's their thinking basically, that they got infected because of vaccination, and that's not the truth basically. main thing is while going for vaccination that there have been lot of queues. There is again a crowding of people, and people tend to forget wearing properly mask, and that's the main reason behind getting infected while after getting in vaccine. So that's one of the important thing we need to keep in mind whenever you are going for a vaccination, either you are a young person or a middle aged person or a old age person. You should keep in mind that you need to be 100% sure that your mouth and your nose are properly covered with a proper mask, and keep it on till you are completely vaccinated. Don't remove it until you are home. That's very one of the important things, because I have seen lot of patients who got vaccinated and got infected later on. And almost in Pune actually, we have seen lot the vaccination drive. Once it started, the even the second wave started along with the same during the same duration. So a lot of people have thinking about same. It's like one of the misconceptions that they got infection from vaccine. So that's, I think, important thing.
I'd just like to add one point to that. Dr. Kulkarni brought up an extremely important point. A lot of patients have gone to the vaccination center, received their first dose, 6-7 days later turned COVID positive. The vaccine has made sure that I've turned COVID positive. It's because of the vaccine. I should have taken Covaxin, not Covishield. It's a common complaint, right? I've had a few patients admitted here who blame their COVID purely on the vaccine. You cannot turn COVID positive from either of the vaccines. That's a very, very big fact that everyone has to accept. If you've turned positive, and irrespective of your timing with your vaccine, it's because you got exposed and you got infected with COVID-19. That's it. It has nothing to do with Covishield or Covaxin. You were when you probably got it at the vaccination center, maybe, or wherever you got it. It is not because of the vaccine. That's something that the public really needs to understand.
So thank you for that valuable information, and I hope Mr. Satyendra got his answer. The next question is by Mr. Deepak Chatterjee. He's a bit worried about young people, and he's saying that young people are beginning to get panicky, and they're anxious, and there is great fear about this virus being airborne. So, could you please inform our audience, our viewers, about how to tackle this?
I think it still remains that though we still don't have data pointing towards that COVID is airborne, and I still feel, and most data points to that it is still spreading via droplets. So people with their masks as a beard, people with their masks below the nose and mouth who talk, who cough, who sneeze, those are the main ways in which it gets spread. This current wave that we are seeing has a lot more infectivity, as everyone is appreciating. Possibly because one is, of course, various other factors. One of the major factors is we are also dealing with certain mutant strains, which are highly more infective than the previous wave for sure. But it does not mean that the virus is airborne. We haven't got definitive data that it is airborne, but definitely droplet transmission still remains the main mode of transmission. There were a lot of studies done on how long does COVID last on a plastic surface, on a cardboard surface, on a cell phone, or on a watch, on a metal surface. All those studies, there were a lot of studies done in Cambridge, which said it can last for up to 5 days. And we had all those things last year. I still feel that wear your mask over your nose and mouth, cough etiquette, cough hygiene, sanitize your hands. I think these are the three cornerstones and pillars of preventing COVID. And I think myths that it's airborne, or it's going to transmit from this surface, that surface. I think if you practice these three things and keep yourself safe, you should be protected against infection.
I think there's a very important point which is asked in this question also, which is that young people are feeling anxious and panicky. I think as healthcare providers, we need to also recognize that mental health during the pandemic is a very important concept of both the public and the healthcare providers. So for the public, my only suggestion is do not get worried by seeing news reports or trying to Google information or trying to fill yourself with negativity. We also need to understand that 80 to 85% of COVID disease is mild, and that there is a very good chance of recovery if early recognition and constant monitoring is done. So we have to recognize that there is a mental health aspect to this pandemic, And I would like to urge people that, if they're finding themselves anxious, if they're finding themselves worried, speak to a doctor, speak to a trained counselor who will be able to guide you in this. There is no shame in admitting that I'm feeling anxious and worried. We have to remove the stigma from mental health, which is associated with this pandemic, both for the public and for the healthcare workers. That is what as Sri Vinod Gupta already said in the beginning, this infodemic is also creating a lot of mental stress. And that is why a session like this organized by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to spread the truth and the right facts is very important to bring down those levels of stress.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin, Dr. Chaitanya. I hope that answers the query. There is another from Mr. Baidyanath. Mr. Baidyanath is asking if diabetic and a blood pressure patient can take the vaccine.
Yeah, there is no as such problem with taking vaccine for anybody unless and until they're having a hypoallergic profile. I mean, if they are prone for certain allergies, then only then you need to be monitored carefully. Otherwise, as such, there is no contraindication for vaccination, even in case of immunocompromised, diabetic, hypertension. Rather, they should be vaccinated properly and they should be vaccinated aggressively because they have the higher chance of getting complications at a higher level because of COVID rather than as compared to other people. So vaccination is for all, and everybody should get vaccinated unless and until they are less than 18 years of age. That's the guideline right now.
All right.
I would like to add another thing actually for the last question. As Dr. Nitin said that stigma is there definitely. Along with the stigma, there is another denial in society that they don't have COVID, even despite of having mild symptoms of sore throat and cough, and they try to correlate with something else that has been caused because of something else, and that trend continues on for like minimum 5 to 6 days. And once they develop certain sort of breathness and something like that, little bit of worrying symptoms, then only they go to the hospital, or even then also they go for some medications, home remedies only. So that's kind of denial that is hurting a lot in young people. That's what I have seen a lot. I mean, a lot of young patients come with complaints of this sort basically for duration of almost like 7 to 8 days, and they don't tend to monitor their vitals at all. They don't have knowledge about saturation levels, oxygen levels. They tend to ignore the basic things which have been told frequently on every platform, like whatever, I mean, WhatsApp, Facebook, whatever you name, everybody is telling you that you need to monitor your oxygen levels and all, but they tend to ignore it a lot. And I would like to request everybody, just don't deny about any symptoms. Anything can be COVID related to symptoms which have been put in, and that for that you need to talk to your doctor as early as possible. That's the important thing, and that will relieve your confusion and anxiety also. Let the doctor decide whether you have COVID or not. Don't try to overanalyze yourself, and don't undermine also. It should be a balanced thing, and look at your symptoms very neutrally. Talk to your doctor, visit him, let him check you, let him advise you proper investigations. And till then, don't worry. Even if, as Dr. Nitin said rightly, that it is very treatable. 95 to 97% of the patients are properly treated, and they have been discharged even after admission also. So it's very important to keep your anxiety levels under control. Don't try to overanalyze symptoms, and don't try to undermine also.
That is the correct way forward, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you for giving that information, because there is no point in endangering your near and dear ones or the people in society. And the later you take action, the more difficulty there is in trying to get things under control. So the next question is from Mr. Sagnik Das. Mr. Sagnik Das is asking what are the best foods to eat to build up a good immunity on a daily basis. And he's also asking if honey and cinnamon water do any good to boost immunity. I think this also relates to one of the myths where ginger, lemon, honey, Indian spices are considered good for treating or fighting COVID-19. So I think we can take an overall holistic view on this. Please, doctors. Thank you.
See, what I feel, these are whatever the data is available from traditional point of view. It's mainly these are good immunity boosters. That's what the dietitians and the nutritionists can say about these spices and everything else. But as far as the allopathy and technical data is concerned, there is no as such that COVID is not going to get resolved because of any kind of spices or honey, ginger, or garlic, or whatever the ingredients you want to add in that cocktail or whatever it is. So my personal view is you can take these things, that is okay as per your comfort, to relieve your sore throat or keeping your throat warm, or to feel better with the symptoms and whatever it is. But as far as COVID is concerned, it doesn't have any significant effect on it. There is no proven data. It doesn't relieve with these kind of home remedies as such, whatever we know. They can be good for routine cold and cough and sore throat. But as far as COVID is concerned, that is not a thing to go.
I think we just have to understand that it's a common perception, which we encounter daily in the world, not only for COVID, for any other disease, that the first question that comes from an Indian patient and their attender is, "Doctor, what can we eat?" I think that is the first question that all doctors encounter, whether the diagnosis is a kidney problem or cancer or anything else. The first question everyone asks is, "Doctor, what can we eat or drink?" Now, coming to specifically to COVID, in fact, the World Health Organization has also issued a statement that some of these products might have an overall beneficial impact on your health. And we cannot deny it, because traditionally they have been used for many years and they might have an overall impact on your health, because we know a good diet is important for good health. So that's the first point. They may be beneficial for your overall impact on health. Do they cure and treat COVID? The current answer is absolutely no, based on whatever data and scientific evidence we have. Because what happens is, there is the tendency which keeps to come, "Oh, I am having ginger, turmeric and all that honey, so I am free from COVID. Let me go out into the park or to a crowded area." And that is what is endangering the Indian healthcare system today. You can have it. There is no harm in having ginger, honey, or whatever things. But I would like to caution here on one thing. Please do not use any over-the-counter herbal prescriptions, because we are noticing that some of these products can cause side effects and can be harmful to the liver. So anything which is natural and homemade, you can have it, but please do not take any over-the-counter so-called herbal prescription, because we do not know what the contents of them are, and we are seeing quite a number of people present with acute liver failure with these products.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin and Dr. Kulkarni there. Another question is coming from Mr. Ashutosh Mishra. He's saying a lot of RT-PCR tests are giving false negative reports. Is it because of the mutants?
That's actually true. A lot of the WHO has actually released, I think in the last week, a new spectrum of COVID, where we call it suspected or probable COVID. So till now we were dealing with predominantly COVID positive patients, but in this current wave, we're having a lot of patients who have symptoms of COVID, behaving like COVID, but coming RT-PCR successively negative. But if you do a CT thorax or you do that inflammatory marker, everything points toward COVID except the RT-PCR report. And this is possibly due to the mutants. We have a double mutant. We've also got a dedicated triple mutant as well, unfortunately. And they have found that these are escaping the RT-PCR test. Now, why it's escaping the RT-PCR test, there are various scientific explanations for the same, including a mutation of the virus to prevent it from detection. But we're finding this is the most deadly, because you get an RT-PCR negative and you're happy that these are not symptoms of COVID. But unfortunately, 3-4 days later, you suddenly deteriorate, and we've had a lot of patients coming to the ICU with that. So there is this problem currently. So the WHO has said that they should consider 4 classes of people before you call them COVID. One is those who have an RT-PCR positive report, those who have symptoms suggestive of COVID, those who have a CT scan suggestive of COVID, or those who have all 3 with an RT-PCR negative report. You still call them probable COVID or behaving like COVID or COVID-like cases. And these are very important to catch early, because often, because they've got RT-PCR negatives, they don't come to you till week 2, by which it may be too late. And this is the current problem that we're having because of the mutant strains.
Just adding up to what Chaitanya was saying, I think there was one of the WhatsApp posts or Facebook posts, which I tell went more viral than COVID itself. because when we talk of social media, we talk about how viral the post go, and this post went more viral than COVID itself. And it said that if you hold your breath for 10 seconds or 20 seconds, you do not have COVID. I think that is one very important myth to address and break, saying the only way you can establish a diagnosis of COVID-19 is by either doing a laboratory virological test or an imaging test. As Chaitanya rightly pointed out, again, it's all about the laxity which creeps in, saying that sometimes elders who are of a little higher age or elderly people may not be able to hold their breath for 10 to 20 seconds because of a normal aging process. It does not mean they have the virus. Similarly, if a youngster has the virus, he may be able to hold it even for 30 seconds if he's an athlete and all. This has no relationship whether the virus is present in the body or not. The only way to establish is A, if the person has symptoms suggestive of COVID-19, or if the RT-PCR or a virological test comes positive, or there's a high clinical index of suspicion and the CT and other inflammatory markers are pointing towards COVID-19. So please do not indulge in this, that saying, oh, I was able to hold my breath for 10 to 20 seconds, but I'm having fever, sore throat and cough, but I'm not having COVID-19, and then go on to infect everyone else in the neighborhood or household.
I would like to add one thing. As you said that RT-PCR might not be positive in initial. The AIMS director also said same thing. You should treat all the symptomatic patients who are suspicious of COVID infection for first 5 to 7 days. Their RT-PCR might not be positive. That was his statement. But before that also we used to say same thing for all the other patients of mine last year also, that rapid antigen test, there are two types of tests we do for swab basically. One is a rapid antigen test, depending upon the kit to kit, the sensitivity, that meaning the positivity of that test can be around 50% only. That's not more than that. Depending upon kit to kit, it may vary. And similarly, the RT-PCR is also not a 100% sensitive test. So if you are going for a RT-PCR test, even if it comes out negative and if you are having symptoms, that doesn't mean that you are COVID negative. So it has got only around 70% probability or a sensitivity that it can be positive for a patient, COVID symptomatic patient. But if it is negative, that doesn't mean that you are not a COVID person or a COVID infected patient. So, and secondly, again, coming to a very important myth, there are a lot of patients, as Dr. Chaitanya said, that a lot of patients come after getting deteriorated after second week. A lot of people go for HRCT chest or CT scan chest with their minimal symptoms within first 3 to 4 days of their illness. And at that point of time, their CT score, that's the new normal now. People, patient itself tells the doctor that my CT score is this much. So, and they tell that my score is only 4. My CT score was only 4 in the first week. Now it has increased to 10, 12 or 13, 14, whatever it is. The main problem is you shouldn't go for a HRCT test without a proper clinician's advice. And in my opinion, the HRCT test should be limited to only clinicians. They should only advise, and it is not legally allowed to go for a CT scan without a prescription. So keep in mind that just because you have symptoms, you should go for a CT scan to diagnose yourself COVID or not. That is not the thing. Let the clinician or let the doctor decide whether you need a CT scan or not. Because unnecessarily going for a repeated CT scan, even if you go for a CT within first 3 to 4 days, later on, if you worsen in symptomatically, you might need to go for another CT scan. That's like another radiation exposure. That's not useful for you. That will create another complication later on in your life. You'll be exposing yourself for unnecessary radiation. So keep in mind, that's another myth I would like to mention, that going for a CT without any prescription is not advisable at all. CT scan is advisable only after proper clinician's advice.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. That was again very informative and hopefully is helping our viewers and listeners in becoming confident in fight against COVID-19. All right, so a few more questions to go, and I think about in 5 number. And we'll take the next one from Mr. Rajneesh Bharti. He's asking, what is the use of livermectin and does it help in COVID-19?
So again, for the general public out there, ivermectin is an anti-helminthic or an anti-parasitic drug which we use to treat certain worm infestations. But though the WHO and CDC haven't really stressed on it, a lot of studies, not only from Africa but also from Asia and India, have shown that there is some benefit with ivermectin. Now, what this benefit is that it reduces possibly the viral load to some extent, and it doesn't do anything else much with regards to mortality or morbidity, but definitely does reduce the viral load and thereby your risk of transmission. But unfortunately, we haven't come up to a universal dose for that. There are various studies which have suggested different dosing regimens for ivermectin, and we haven't come up to a single dosing strategy which is universally acceptable. But in the early stages, we have found that use of ivermectin, especially in our clinical practice at St. John's, we found that there is some benefit with ivermectin. But again, as we've been reiterating through this whole webinar, it has to be given by the physician to the appropriate person at the appropriate time with the prescription. Hoarding of ivermectin and giving it to all and sundry in the family, children, adults, elderly, is not advisable unless a physician has prescribed it. And again, it's not 100% guarantee. As with remdesivir, this is even less evidence than remdesivir, and it may reduce the viral transmission, it may reduce your infectivity rate, but it still does not mean you remove your mask. It still means you're infected with COVID and follow the same precautions as per your treating COVID physician.
Just drawing to the point of the AIIMS COVID protocol just released, there is one very clear line if you read that protocol, which even the AIIMS Institute have said. These therapies may be done based on low certainty of evidence, and it should be avoided in pregnant and lactating women. So that line itself says that right now we have limited evidence, and because we know that side effects of ivermectin are not that much, in certain situations and based on some data coming in from Asian countries, the treating clinician may deem it fit to use it. But again, most important point, please do not stockpile ivermectin. Do not hold ivermectin. The approval is only may use it in mild disease by the AIIMS recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya and Dr. Nitin. We'll move on to the next question posed by a user. The question is from Shania Maskrinas, and Shania is asking if an asthmatic person is at a greater risk of COVID-19. That is her first question. The second question is, what is the recovery rate in such people if they are infected?
In general, if we can talk about any respiratory illnesses in general, I mean, not only asthma, any like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, some allergic bronchitis, or somebody who is a chronic smoker also will include that category also. So anything which is going to cause, which is already causing your own respiratory system or your lungs already at a lower working capacity, basically. Because of any these kind of illnesses, the lung capacity of the lungs go down in general, in normal terms. So these sort of illnesses, if the patient with these sort of illnesses, if the patient gets infected because of COVID, that will again overburden the lungs. The immunity is already low, and the infection will again increase the probability of recovering, decrease the probability of recovering from the illness to a much greater extent. I don't think there is an as such percentage you can say that this much percentage of people will improve and this much. It is one of the high risk factors for COVID infection, and the patient with these respiratory illnesses and along with the COVID infection will have a lesser probability as compared to other patients without any risk factors. I think Dr. Chaitanya and Dr. Nitin can add on to this if they have some experience.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Kulkarni has said in a nutshell. A lot of panic sets in, especially in elderly people who have an underlying lung disease, right? Yes, there are two concepts that people need to understand. There's something called local immunity and there's something called systemic immunity. And people who have lung damage due to whatever reason, their local pulmonary immunity might be less than the people who have a normal lung system, and they are more susceptible not only to the spread of COVID in the lungs, but also the damage due to it. So you're in a high risk category if you have an underlying lung disease, not only to catch COVID, but also to develop the complications of COVID. So you have to be as, if not more, vigilant than the normal population, right? But that does not necessitate, extreme panic or the hoarding of ivermectin and dexamethasone, as Nitin reiterated. It just means that you have to be a little more careful. And I also feel that people around people who have lung disease must be much more vigilant. Their caregivers, their family members should be much more careful around such people to prevent transmission of this infection. But the protocols for safety, that is hand sanitization and masks, do not change.
And very important for these high risk people to get vaccinated. We have all mentioned that, vaccination protects to a tune of 70 to 80%. But let me tell you, the most important point is both the vaccines which we have available now from data protects 100% from severe disease. And ultimately, that is the aim we want in these high risk patients. We want to prevent severe disease. We want to reduce hospitalization, and we want to prevent deaths. So remember, the most important question, doctor, which vaccine can I take? Across the world now, most vaccines, including the Covaxin and Covishield, have now reported 100%, not 70, 80, 90, 100% protection from severe disease. So especially high-risk people, diabetic, hypertensive, underlying lung disease, please go get yourself vaccinated.
I hope, Shanaya, your question is answered with that detailed take by our experts. The next question is from Mr. Deep Joy. He's saying that aren't distancing and wearing masks more crucial appropriate behaviors? That's number one. Number two is, shouldn't our public health communication shift to laser-like focus on these rather than including less effective behaviors? He's basically saying that aren't distancing and wearing masks more crucial appropriate behaviors? Please.
I would like to just add one thing on a lighter note. Ours is almost like 25 to 30 bedded ICU at Pune. It's specifically dedicated for COVID patients. And it's the only proper usage of masks, basically, N95 masks for all the healthcare workers and doctors also. That's the only reason we have yet not been infected with the COVID virus. So even in short, I would like to just mention one thing: proper mask usage. That's one of the most important thing. And social distancing, it is very difficult in India with so much of population crowd around. So I think government needs to have. They have already advised to wear proper mask and everything, and they are already doing it. But it's our duty as a general citizen of this country that we should wear mask every time, irrespective of whether we had COVID or we didn't have any COVID, or whether we are vaccinated or somebody else is vaccinated or not. Irrespective of anything, you need to wear mask completely all the time. Just keep a distance of around 6 feet from other person while you are talking or while you are in a crowd or something like that. Just it's our duty rather than government is already doing its own whatever they can do, but it's our duty also to keep everything to ourselves, to keep ourselves safe. I would say right now, stay home, stay safe. That's the most.
I think Dr. Kulkarni said a very important thing. As much as you want to blame the healthcare system, you want to blame the government for various policies with regards to COVID or vaccination, you first have to look at yourself and see whether you've been a responsible citizen of the country and on the world. Have you worn your mask appropriately? Have you practiced hand sanitization? And have you been careful with you and your family? Only if you are able to perform those three things can you look at others and criticize. I think it's very important that all of us not only learn mask etiquette and cough hygiene, but also maintain social distancing as much as possible. Wear a mask, sanitize your hands, and be safe. I think if you can follow this, then you can prevent yourself from getting COVID.
I'll just give a very personal example. In our oncology OPD, over time, and I'm sure even Chaitanya and Dr. Rahul would have experienced, we have come across COVID-19 patients without knowing that they have been COVID-19. They would have come to us for some other problem. and then we, based on some suspicion, or before we want them to be taken up for surgery, or before we want to do any other intervention, we would have swabbed them, and they would have turned out as COVID-19 positive. But what is it that has protected us from getting infected? The answer is very simple: compliant, proper wearing of mask and hand hygiene. If healthcare workers can follow this and prevent themselves from being infected from COVID-19, despite being closer to COVID-19 patients and having a higher risk, the general public should take inspiration from this and say that, yes, by mask wearing, I will not get COVID-19. Again, with mask wearing, there are some myths which go around saying oxygen levels will drop, carbon dioxide levels will go up. I have worn mask for 8 hours, 10 hours at a stretch, monitored my pulse oximeter, and it's been above 96-97% all the time. And there are many doctors in the USA who have shown this even on Twitter in a live feed to encourage the public that mask wearing does not cause any harm. In fact, it is one of the most important thing, as rightly the person who asked us the question said, the focus has to be on mask wearing and social distancing. Like everyone said, we know in India, social distancing comes with its own set of challenges for whatever purpose. But mask wearing is something that we can all adhere to. And it need not be N95 masks for the general public if it is not available, or logistically there are other reasons. Simple double masking with cloth mask or a surgical mask will be helpful in preventing the infection.
I think we can deduce it to in effect to this, that it's your behavior that's fighting COVID-19 or promoting it. So I think that's a very, very useful way of looking at it. From there, we'll proceed to our second last question. And I apologize to the users who have put in a lot of questions, who have taken interest in this webinar, for not having been able to take their questions. We have paucity of time, there are constraints, but these are the last two questions that we'll take. And hopefully all your queries have been answered. The second last question is from Ms. Swati Mehta. She's asking if can someone having epilepsy take COVID-19 vaccination?
So to answer that, there are a lot of guidelines strictly from the UK and the US with various vaccines available, including the Indian health regulatory organizations as well. If you've had epilepsy, you're under control with anti-epileptic drugs, there is no contraindication to take either Covishield or Covaxin. There was a huge issue with the AstraZeneca the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, that it caused some neurological complications in a few people back in October 2020. But that has been safely, that has been said that it's completely safe and no issue with anybody with epilepsy taking the vaccine. Of course, there is a caveat which was published, I think, somewhere in Belgium, which said that if they're having active seizures, if their epilepsy is not controlled, then it may be warranted to get it under control before vaccinating, but it's not an absolute contraindication.
All right. Yeah. I hope that answers Ms. Swati Mehta's question. So the last question for today is from Mr. Saptarshi Chandra. No, I'm sorry. The user name is not there. So I'll just ask the question simply. Is it okay to keep a bottle of SP-DOS Perma for emergency in case of difficulty in breathing? If I read it rightly.
I'm not too sure how to answer that question because I'm obviously not going to suggest carrying that if you have difficulty in breathing. I think there's also a thing going around about camphor. Start inhaling camphor and your oxygen levels will pick up immediately if you don't get a hospital bed. I think these are things that are not going to save you. If you're hypoxic with low oxygen, the only thing that's going to save you is a hospital and oxygen. So I think those are the best things to look at, because wasting your time procuring all of this would rather be spent in finding a hospital bed, if you ask me.
All right. So I hope with that we'll wind up the session for today.
Kush, just one last thing to our viewers. Actually, 2 points I just want to say. We all talk about being patriotic to our country. I just want to say one thing. It is going to be only vaccination that will save our nation. That is the first point. And the second point is that, and this is a very, I feel this should be the message from sort of the take-home message. We all talked about mask wearing, social distancing, vaccination. We have started with this infodemic. We will end with this infodemic. Before forwarding any WhatsApp or social media post regarding COVID-19, please check it yourself or fact check it before forwarding it. Let us not forward something which is rumored or can cause more anxiety or which is false. That's my humble request to all the citizens of this country who are watching it, all to the medical fraternity also. As medical fraternity, even we have more responsibility about what we put out on social media in terms of anything related to COVID-19. Let it be fact-based and let it be certified or have something which is WHO-based, CDC, or some of the international or national organization. Please fact check before forwarding any WhatsApp or social media posts.
I just like to add one thing. I think Nitin just added a fourth pillar: social distancing, wear a mask properly, hand sanitizing, and social media distancing. I think if you add that as the fourth pillar, half of our problems as a nation will settle. Thank you.
So I hope that with our session today, we have been able to set the record straight and bring to our participants and viewers correct information and manage to bust quite some myths. Of course, this is probably just a droplet in an ocean of misinformation, but it is an effort, and I think we'll go with that. I'll also like to inform our viewers that we'll do one-on-one webinar only for the Q&A for the people who could not get their questions answered. And I'll also like to now extend a vote of thanks to all our participants today, to Dr. Kulkarni, Dr. Chaitanya, Dr. Nitin, and Madam Professor Professor Samant for participating in today's session and helping us give a direction on how to fight the misinformation that is out there in public and effectively and confidently tackle COVID-19. So with that, we'll end the session today, and I'll hand over the mic to Mr. Vinod Kumar, Deputy Director, Press Information Bureau. Go on.
Thank you, Kush. There was a wonderful and really encouraging, enriching session on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic as well as the infodemic. I would like to really thank Dr. Rahul Kulkarni, Dr. Nitin and Dr. Chaitanya for taking your time from their busy schedule and attending our program. For the viewers who could not get their answers from the YouTube chat, we will do one exclusive webinar only for Q&A session. Hope we can tie up with the same doctors or doctors from other stream. Thank you, and we'll meet you again in the next webinar. Meanwhile, you can subscribe to our channel and click that bell icon so that you'll get notifications for all our upcoming programs. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.